Hello, welcome to From the Hill. I'm your host, State Representative Jim Arciero. Today I have a good friend from Westford, Joe Diamond, who is the Executive Director of MASSCAP. MASSCAP is the Massachusetts Association for Community Action. Joe, thank you very much for coming on my show. I appreciate it.
Thank
Now, this
you.
has been quite a tradition since I was elected in 2008 and took office in 2009. You've been a frequent guest on my show to talk a little bit about MASSCAP, who MASSCAP serves, the role of MASSCAP, how you got involved. But first, I usually do this at the end of the show, Joe, but I figured today would be a little easier for the viewer to know a little bit about your background.
Oh, sure.
We met years ago, I think, when I was 21 years old working at the State House for Representative Jeff Hall, pre-internet.
Sure.
Part of your job for the budget was to obtain a copy of the budget, and because we couldn't get it online, I recall you would call and say, "Can you leave one at the Westford Fletcher Library?" and so we can come and pick that up. So times have changed quite a bit, but I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Oh, my pleasure. And it seems like years, and it was years and years ago, but it seems like a whole era ago that you had to work on and depend on the printed version of the budget. Times have changed. And you said you were 21. I was much older than I think at the time, but I do remember reaching out, and it was always great to be able to work with you. And that was a time when I was working with MASSCAP,
Sure.
just starting out, I believe.
Yeah.
But before that, I actually had worked in the legislature with now Senator Rosenberg, but when he was a state rep. This is 1988, 89, and 90, and even into 1991 with him when he was a state representative from Amherst. And then from there, got connected with community action agencies, and then now run MASSCAP, the association for those. But prior to that, even I'm the son of a former executive director of United Way,
Okay.
which is of course a community-based
Certainly.
organization that raises resources and deploys them locally, which got me interested in that kind of work. And I do see community action agencies in a similar vein. While they don't raise resources, they do work very much and very closely with local residents. And that's the part that's so appealing to me, to be able to work across the state, to be able to kind of live here in Westford, which is a very open and peaceable community and tolerant and diverse. And then to be able to live here and live near one of our agencies, of course, in Lowell, Community Teamwork, Inc., which is one of 24 community action agencies. So, and I've been with MASSCAP since, believe it or not, 1992.
Now, where did you grow up? Did you grow up in the area? Did you grow up in Massachusetts? Or?
I was born in Pottsville, Pennsylvania, which is north of Philadelphia. It was actually a coal mining area.
Okay.
Moved to Newcastle near Pittsburgh, then to Battle Creek, Michigan, and then to New Jersey, southern New Jersey, and then a series of interesting events made my way up to Massachusetts.
Indeed.
Which, in fact, I think I always wanted to live and work in Massachusetts and the Boston area. So
Now, you moved to Westford when?
In 1993.
93, that's
Yeah.
right. And Vinebrook, right? It was in Vinebrook Estates?
Vinebrook, yep.
And you're on Trailside now, right?
We moved 400 yards away across the woods. Yep.
That's right.
So, and love it, and really enjoy living in Westford and seeing it change. And I think because of your influence and others, it's changing in a way that's manageable and very pleasing to most of us, all of us.
Certainly, as a lifelong resident myself, there's been a lot of changes, but a lot of positive changes as well. Things are obviously a little bit different than they were when I was a kid, but the leadership in town has done a tremendous job at balancing all those pieces to make this a beautiful town, and obviously top 10 in education and one of the best places to live according to that national publication, Forbes and Newsweek, So it's wonderful, and I'm very proud of all those things. A little bit about MASSCAP, though. As the executive director, there's a number of community action organizations under sort of your umbrella. A little bit about how your role relates to that and how you work with those groups.
MASSCAP is the association, or the professional association, of those 24 community action agencies in Massachusetts. There are 1,000 across the country, and in fact, we're celebrating 50 years of community action, 50 years of the war on poverty, which I'll get into more in a second. But the role of MASSCAP is to help coordinate, to support in a variety of different ways the work of the agencies. The total resource that comes into the agencies, both federal and state, is about $500 million. We serve about 650,000 people across the state. About 4,000 people are employed by these 24 agencies, and they're based in the poorest communities in the state. But we serve every single community. Every single person is eligible for a service depending on their income, no matter where they live. It all depends which agency is closest. And so we provide training, resources, communication support for the agencies. We also work with legislators like yourself to talk about the policy issues that are important to the people that we serve.
Now, one of the major policy issues that you work on, and you have to, essentially work and advocate, with the federal government and the state government, is fuel assistance. A little bit about that program.
That's been around for quite a long time, and the federal government has underwritten fuel assistance, which helps people cover the cost of heating, and it can be oil heat or gas or electric. But the federal government has, for years and years, and continues to support folks with those heating costs. But the amount of the resource has actually gone down significantly, and as it's gone down, you and your colleagues have supported the program by adding, in 5 of the last 10 years, for example, between $10 and $20 million, depending on the need. And right about now, this time of year, is when we're the most concerned because it gets colder and colder. But the resource that is allocated through the federal program, as I said, is getting less and less. And so right now, we have about $900, for example, that we can give to people who heat with oil. That covers about 1 tank. It takes about 2 to 3 tanks to get through the winter. So people are very judicious with the way they use their heat, but we begin to get concerned. And so we've been talking with you and your colleagues about not only a resource that we could access this current year to add to the fuel assistance resource, but in the years that come, we're hoping that there will be a line item in the budget for state fuel assistance resources to add to the federal resource, because it's leveled out to a point where it's not near the $200 million that would come in. It's mostly now around $121 million that comes into Massachusetts, and so we really do need some addition. I also want to thank, through you and to you, to the legislature, thank you for the forward funding, which was passed in October. What that did was it allowed our agencies, and this was in the midst of the shutdown, it allowed our agencies to actually get started with fuel assistance because federal resources were delayed. So the state allocated $20 million, allowed our agencies to get started, do the admin, get people in the door, and then the federal money started coming in again. That forward funding is going to be reimbursed when the federal money comes in, and it has come in. So that money has been reimbursed to the state. What we're asking for now is an additional resource that would help those people who are now coming to the end of their oil tank, January and February. So it's very important, it's critical. It is matched in some sense with weatherization, which helps people who, low-income folks and vulnerable folks, elderly, children, veterans, helps them to make sure that the heating is efficient in their homes. It makes the homes tighter, adds insulation, and overall is smart because it's energy efficient.
Right.
So those two together are really critical when it comes to the basic needs that we know people face.
You know, in the last about 5.5 years that I've served in the legislature, getting elected in 2008, like I had spoken of, and being sworn in 2009, we had significant economic challenges, and clearly we're not out of the woods yet. You know, one of the worst economic situations we've had in decades. Tremendous amount of cuts to social services, tremendous amount of cuts in healthcare and access for individuals. One of my questions was, did you find this last 5-year period that you've been the executive director one of the most challenging because of the federal cuts and the state cuts, and finding ways to advocate and make sure those important resources are brought to people that are in tremendous need?
Thank you for the question. It's one of the most trying times we've experienced because of not only are we facing those cuts that you mentioned, but the economy was such that we were serving more people, but with fewer resources. So it became a double challenge. More, in fact, the people that we were serving, it's clear that the gap between rich and poor is widening, but the people that we were serving now more and more folks who had not been in need of our services were coming to the door, like for fuel assistance, because of the economic downturn. There's another program that we run which has everything to do with the economic situation. That's a program with the Attorney General's office. And it has to do with helping people who are facing foreclosure. Many folks now come to us through this program, and we're able to help them stabilize in terms of addressing their needs, but then also move, unfortunately, from the home if it's been foreclosed upon. So it's a tough time. It has everything to do with the economic instability that we are experiencing during that period, and we are still experiencing to some degree. And it helps us achieve the goals of fighting homelessness, and it helps us also help these folks who are going through an incredible trauma. If there's anybody who's listening to this who is dealing with foreclosure, thinks they might be needing to address issues related to covering the mortgage, or in the midst of a foreclosure piece, they could reach out to Community Teamwork in Lowell, or they can go to our website, masscap.org, to see how they could access this service. We're very happy to be able to do it. So it's just one example of what we're facing because of the economic downturn. We talked about fuel assistance. The important element of that program, along with other programs, is that it helps people offset costs so that they don't have to make excruciating choices between heating, eating, clothing, and shelter. So if we can offset some costs and get people in a position where they can access workforce development, job training, job readiness, and other kinds of things that would get them jobs with family-sustaining wages, that's what we're all about. It also brings me to another public policy, which we've been promoting along with a lot of other organized community groups, is the minimum wage bill, and there's also a ballot question. That actually was one of the pieces that people have been writing about lately in recognition of the 50th anniversary of the war on poverty, as one of the programs that helps people avoid this kind of vulnerability. There are a whole series of programs that were noted in some articles, one in the New York Times, that if not for those programs, including community action agencies, but if not for those programs, there would be so many more people who would be vulnerable. The minimum wage is one of those because it helps people with a floor of income that otherwise they would probably be having a very hard time dealing with and addressing everyday costs. So the reason we like the minimum wage is to raise it from $8 to $11 is one very, very important piece, and it's a really good start helping to get people stable. Another program is the tax program that we run, the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program, which brings in resources and tax credits to people. Again, bringing in resources, help them deal with certain costs. We match that up with financial literacy, and we're kind of on our way to helping people become stable and to thrive.
Talk a little bit about financial literacy. It's so important for individuals to have that knowledge about being sustainable and financially sustainable. It's so incredibly important, especially for families in tough socioeconomic situations who may not have had that type of schooling or that type of guidance. Talk a little bit about that.
More and more, financial literacy is something that is being recognized as something that should be provided as early as possible and across as many venues as possible. In this state, there's an initiative, actually collaboration with, I think it's the Department of Education, to bring to as many high schools as possible to include this in the curriculum. We know as providers of all kinds of different services that there are teachable moments when you're working with families and children. And we want to, building on what we recommended in the commission many years ago, we want to build into Head Start, programs at shelters, programs at hotels and motels that are housing homeless people. We want to build into the interactions that we have with the folks that we're serving, financial literacy concepts. So that's part of what we do. We train our case managers and other case managers to be able to talk about basic budgeting, basic banking, and access to benefits, among other things, when they're working with families in, say, in the context of Head Start. So we see, and it's been recognized as incredibly critical, that financial literacy be provided in as many ways and in as many venues as possible. It's something that all of our members do. And it's a signature piece like early education and care and like fuel assistance that we run across the network. And it's something that community teamwork in Lowell does very well.
And this, clearly this would be information and helpful for individuals trying to avoid foreclosures as well.
Absolutely.
And asset development. You've done a lot of work with asset development. Can you talk a little bit about some of the work you've done there?
Sure. Thank you. It's a broad heading that includes 3 approaches to helping people develop long-term assets that will stand them in good stead over the years. Asset development builds on the GI Bill, which was a program that still exists, but was started, I believe, after World War II, to help veterans. And it was just by dint of being a veteran that you would get this assistance to either go to school or to own a home, develop an asset. So the modern version of that includes match savings accounts, which we run for folks, financial education, another one, and believe it or not, the earned income tax credit or the volunteer tax assistance. So all these things together help people with immediate and long-term assets. The asset purchase part is we help people to save so they can buy a home, so they can go to higher education, or they can start a business. It really has everything to do with the American dream. And the reason we like it so much is that it's a program that builds on the stability that we're able to provide with programs like fuel assistance. Then we can help move people into education, training, into jobs, and then into assets. It's our philosophy, and I know people share it, that but for certain opportunities, certain training, and certain interactions, the people that we serve can absolutely succeed. So asset development is a big part of that.
Now you also deal, and CTI administers a lot of the programs in Greater Lowell.
Absolutely.
But you also do a number of things with senior services, as well as youth services. So some of the things in senior services is tax preparation for individuals. There's tax preparation, I mentioned seniors, but also for homeless. Talk about a little bit of what you do for the seniors in Greater Lowell.
Well, as far as the seniors are concerned, there is a specific senior services program at CTI. But we also find that when we're able to help seniors with income eligibility programs, that itself can be enormous. We don't need to do it through the context of a specific program for seniors. So both the earned income tax credit or the volunteer tax assistance benefits our seniors. LIHEAP benefits our seniors. In fact, about 30% or more of the folks that we serve are in households with at least one senior. So these are programs that build on the programs that already exist for seniors. In fact, Medicare was noted in several articles about the war on poverty as a critical feature of helping seniors stay out of poverty. In fact, it was noted as probably one of the most successful programs in that regard because it takes care of this enormous insecurity, and that's health insurance.
Right.
So we work with seniors as much as we possibly can to help them access Medicare through local senior centers, and then also the programs that we can work with them on the eligibility programs like fuel assistance.
Now also, there's a number of youth programs as well. Head Start, I think, is one that MASSCAP has been involved with for a number of years, some of the programs there.
Head Start is absolutely critical, and the reason we like it so much, and in fact, we just heard that Head Start, along with several other programs, the resource for it is going to be restored to the pre-sequestration levels. Based on what we understand about the new federal budget that will be hopefully passed. So that's thrilling because for us, Head Start is a critical early education program. We provide it to over about 15,000 families in Massachusetts. The community action agencies provide Head Start programming. There are 17 of us who do it. But there are 30 or so Head Start programs across the state, so some are operating outside of community action. And we are also in a position now to be asking the legislature to consider adding from the $8 million now that currently exists for Head Start, another $2 million to bring it to $10 million. of state allocation to add on to the federal amount. We call it the state supplemental. And again, every little bit helps because it allows us to expand the classrooms, allows us to support parents. It's interesting that you mentioned Head Start as well, because that program lends itself so much to holistic and comprehensive financial education. We actually ran a couple pilot programs in Fitchburg, our agency in Fitchburg called MASSCAP, and at CTI and at ABCD, a pilot program that integrated financial education not only for parents, but for the kids in the classrooms and for the case managers and the teachers who work in Head Start, or what we call the family service workers. So at all levels of that particular program, financial education was offered in different ways, depending on the needs. So the case managers learned how to teach it, the children learned about financial education, and the parents learned what the children were learning so they could reinforce it at home. So it's a program that we see as kind of a model when it comes to not only important service, but integration.
Do you see that program, is it something that MASSCAP would like to move forward with as a permanent program? Obviously there are successes in it, and you know, obviously have that as a program that you would have moving forward.
We are very hopeful.
Of course, there's always a dollar element to it.
Yeah, that's true, and we're hopeful that in the state legislature will consider this request, and we're really hopeful that the volatility on the federal level will be calming down, and that we can get down to the business of budgets being passed, you know, at the beginning of the fiscal year. You and your colleagues every year pass a budget before the fiscal year ends and before the start of the next.
Right.
But on the federal level, that doesn't always happen, and so that volatility, that insecurity, also plays a role. But we're looking forward to a new era there as well.
You know, certainly, you know, we're constitutionally obligated to have a balanced budget every year. However, I think, you know, you're the executive director. I think during the late '90s, when the time Senator Birmingham, President Birmingham, and Speaker Finneran had that standoff, if you recall, in the budget, and things were worked through supplemental budgets, and they couldn't seem to agree on things, if you recall. Thank goodness the leadership in the House and the Senate haven't fallen into those old ways.
That was the exception that proved the rule, though, I think, because you all have always, for the most part, we've been able to rely on. In fact, it's a discipline, too, for us. We know what the cycle's going to be for the budget.
I had a question, and we talked a little bit about fuel assistance early on. And we talked a little bit about how in the last 5 years has been one of the great challenges for MASSCAP, for community action programs, and for individuals who are struggling to keep their head above water during one of the worst economic situations since the Great Depression. You saw sort of the non-traditional individuals looking towards programs they may not have used when they were in a better financial status.
Right.
Are you seeing a turnaround now?
Right.
From the economy? Are you seeing sort of the underemployed, if you will, starting to get themselves in a self-sufficient situation and away from assistance and moving forward and progressing?
We are actually seeing the trend continues. It's just not as intense.
Okay.
People are still facing challenges born of the economy. We were actually talking to the Attorney General's staff today about challenges that we are facing when it comes to the mortgage foreclosure crisis, which stemmed from, or some people say caused, the downturn. But all the mortgages that people had, which were troubling mortgages or mortgages that they really shouldn't have had.
Of course. Unsustainable for their own financial situation, right?
The underwriting itself wasn't as rigorous as it could have been. That situation is diminishing. There's less of that, for sure. But the economic insecurity, the loss of job, health issues remain. So people are facing what we've always encountered. Then when you added the economy, you had another dynamic. That other dynamic is beginning to lessen, but we're still working with people who we hadn't seen before. It's interesting when we talk about this cluster of programming and when we talk about the 50th anniversary of the war on poverty. Within one of the bills that's before the legislature, the welfare reform bill,
right,
which we've looked at, and we're working with other advocates to make sure that it's the best possible bill, along with legislators. There's a provision here that would create a commission on poverty, commission to study poverty, and reduce it by half over time, and to make recommendations. So we would be on that commission along with others. We see that as incredibly timely because we've come so far in the last 50 years. It's time that we not only celebrate our successes, but we take stock of what we can do better. The conditions are different. Different groups are now, challenged and facing challenges and vulnerable. And we know the programs that have been working, and we also know what we can work from based on those lessons to move ahead. And not only are we in the business of providing programs that help with stability and helping people thrive, but we also have to provide opportunity programs that help people realize their opportunities and take those opportunities for better jobs and for opportunities to start their own businesses. So we're excited and hopeful that commission actually is passed and gets underway.
Now, you did mention a little bit about the minimum wage, a little bit about the welfare reform legislation. I think there's some differences in the House and the Senate on both those issues. I know that the House isn't taking up the minimum wage bill per se. I know a big part of the House's version, which isn't kicked out yet, but which there's been discussion from leadership through the press, has been unemployment insurance. So we'll see moving forward, what that bill looks like when it comes out. But I'm sure there'll be spirited debate on both sides of the aisle on the issue, and moderates in the middle too. But I think we're coming close to the end of the show, and I always appreciate you coming in, Joe. It's always timely that you come in during the winter too, especially when we talk about fuel assistance, especially when we talk about resources for people who, I think sometimes people think that poverty ends, at city borders, but it really doesn't. It's everywhere, and people, need the resources and they need the guidance to be able to become self-sufficient and take care of their families.
Well, it's a really good point that you make, and allow me maybe a few more seconds on this. You mentioned borders, and one of city and town borders, and one of the challenges we face during this era where there are more people than there should be, there are more people than you expect, but certainly nobody should ever be homeless, but the numbers are rising, and we're all working on it together, and actually being effective, but we're still concerned about how many folks are homeless. The goal is to eliminate homelessness. We're working on a program now that involves working with folks who are in hotels and motels. The shelter system is saturated to some degree, and folks now need to go into hotels that are engaged with the state to let them be there for a time until they can stabilize. And unfortunately, many people who say live in the Boston area have to go to hotels and motels far away beyond 495. And so you're right, you're absolutely right when you say that economic threats don't have a boundary, don't have a border. What we're doing with folks in hotels and motels is our case managers are going there and helping them to find resources in the community that can help them move out, but also helping with taxes. So doing tax prep in the hotels for homeless folks who are there, because many people may not know this, but people who are facing homelessness are working. In most cases, are working. So and that circles back to one point that I want to make finally. Some of what we're dealing with has to do with a structural challenge. That is, we don't have now the kind of jobs that pay enough. And that's why it's so important to have these other programs. We hope that over time that will change, but because that's the system that we're in there, that's what we're dealing with. Now, all these other programs are so important to help people augment the income that they already have and help them deal with the challenges that they face.
Well, Joe, I really want to thank you for coming on the show. We're out of time. We've gone into overtime a little bit.
Thank you.
There's so much still to talk about, and I hope you come on again to talk a little bit about the great work that MASSCAP does. Look forward to meeting with all of you in the towns of Chelmsford, Littleton, and Westford. Look towards my office hours, which will be posted in the Westford Patch, the Chelmsford Patch, the Westford Eagle, Littleton Independent, Chelmsford Independent, and the Lowell Sun. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.